Okay.
So let me and the people say, let's get free, let's get free, let's get free. My generation is your
Good
liberation.
music
Your
choice, Chuck.
liberation. Say, let's get free.
Welcome, 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 welcome. As you fill in, please put your name and introduce yourself actually in the chat. Name, organization.
From the stations, we are forming a new nation based on justice and forgiveness and
Yeah, Chuck set the vibe for us today.
public reputation.
Appreciate you for that, Chuck. Like it.
How in practice we gon' get these reparations.
Welcome, welcome. I see a lot of faces that I know. I see a lot of names that I don't. So I appreciate you all for dropping in. As you drop in, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, and any other relevant information you feel like you wanted to drop in there for us. Any resources, links, information, etc. Welcome, welcome. I'm gonna give it maybe 2 more minutes for people to file in before we get all the way started. Let's get free.
Liberation is moving through immigration to do what you want to do and improve on a new nation. And liberation is going from cotton picking to speaking truth in opposition to politicians. To liberate is to ruminate on who's trying to hate.
Never heard this before, Chuck. It's a good one.
The one of hate is the one
I
that
like this one. I like this one.
that you want to break. Liberation is straight. There ain't no space, no space in liberation. Nah. And we building the way. So
Dang.
if you're ready to say it in the streets.
Looks like we're about 30 people in. We got about 15 introductions in the chat, but I think people are pretty much in and situated. Get your lunch in. I understand. I just smashed me a burger right before. I see Robin. Welcome, Robin. And that said, thank you, Chuck, again for the musical introduction. I appreciate that. And welcome, everybody. I am Michael Taylor, Program Coordinator of Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. And I want to welcome you all to the Michigan Learning Community to transform public safety and prevent incarceration. Today, we will be discussing, has anything changed? Police accountability 5 years after the passing of George Floyd. And we will specifically be talking about police accountability today. So yeah, welcome everybody in. Next slide, please, Chuck. We were supported, and we are consistently supported by you guys. Some of the groups that supported us today is Emerging Justice, Michigan Roundtable for Just Communities, the Detroit Justice Center, and the Friends of Restorative Justice. So appreciate our supporters. And of course, MySemi. And our agenda for today, of course, is the welcoming introductions. We have a panel of Senator Stephanie Chang is here to deliver some recent information on bills that are being presented, as well as some things that have happened with bills that have been presented. We also have presenters Michael Lynn and Robin Etchison, two local community organizers that deal directly in police accountability. So that panel discussion will be about, has anything changed? Police accountability 5 years later. Then will be followed up by a short Q&A and some wrap up in the next steps. Next slide, please, Chuck. So brief community agreements. Most of us in this room have been in rooms like this, so I don't need to go extensively into them, but I do want to highlight a couple of big ones, that is respecting others. This is a safe space. We are here to learn from one another and get valuable information. So everybody is to be respected in this space. I ask that we respect our speakers. So one mic when anyone is speaking. And lastly, just be open-minded. Next one, Chuck. And learning community goals. If you've been here before, you've heard me talk about this, but we are here to build, share resources, align strategies and tactics, and connect. My Semi's job is to sit and connect everybody in the middle. So that's what we're doing here, sitting in the middle and building.
Gonna stop
And
there.
Chuck, did you
We'll
want to
cover
go over
those.
those? Yeah, I was going to say, we'll cover those a little later. And that being said, again, today's agenda or today's discussion is about has anything changed? But before we get to the discussion points, we actually have Senator Stephanie Chang. She serves as the chair of the Senate Committee on Civil Rights, Judiciary, and Public Safety, and is the champion of a package of police improvement and public trust bills to address issues such as use of force, police training, the use of no-knock warrants, and more. Specifically, we know that no-knock warrants would have been a preventer in the Sandra Bland murder. So, like, her voice is very valuable, and these bills, this bill package is very valuable. So we appreciate your time and information, Senator Chang. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thanks everyone so much for being here. We are 5 years, 5 years and a couple days after the murder of George Floyd, and I know that we have a lot to talk about. I think about the what it meant to process his death as well as the trial afterward. And we are on the heels of a decision in our own state not to retry an officer who was responsible for the death of a man in Grand Rapids, Patrick Lyoya. So I think that it's something. This is a really important conversation for us to be having right now. And I think about the fact that 5 years ago, many people saw that moment as, people called it a reckoning around racial justice. And so, what exactly did we reckon with, and what have we accomplished since then? At the national level, unfortunately, the answer is not a whole lot, although we see changes that have been made in cities and states across the country. But here in the state of Michigan, unfortunately, at the state level, we have not seen the types of changes that folks have been asking for. But that's not for lack of effort. And so I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity over many years, especially over the past 5 years, to be part of a collaborative effort related to improving police practices, transparency, and community trust. I really believe that Michigan can be a leader in tackling issues of public safety and justice. I know that there are good law enforcement officers who are out there who put their lives on the line. But we also absolutely need to ensure sound policies and practices, as well as accountability and transparency within law enforcement, and to ensure standardization of our policies across the state. And we know that Michiganders across the political spectrum, we'll say that again, want and deserve safety in their communities, and that includes safety and interaction with law enforcement officials. And a little bit later on, I'll talk about polling related to the bills that we have introduced. And so, after the tragic deaths of Patrick Lyoya, Samuel Sterling, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tyree Nichols, and far too many others, we know that Michiganders of all backgrounds have rightfully called for and demanded change so that we can improve trust between community members and law enforcement, and so that we can promote greater safety in our communities. So last week in the Senate, we have reintroduced legislation that has previously been introduced in several different iterations over the past 5 years. And these bills are called the Police Practices, Standardization, Transparency, and Trust Bill Package. It's Senate Bills 333 through 343, which would make reasonable and practical changes to how law enforcement officers handle interactions with community members to prevent the use of excessive force. And we have crafted these bills through extensive work with community stakeholders, with law enforcement stakeholders, And we know that these common sense reforms would ensure that Michigan can be a leader in advancing policies to really enhance public safety and justice for everyone. And we actually do build on work that is happening in agencies across the state and country where we have seen changes made. And we really want to make sure that, and the reason why we want to pass legislation at the state level is because it shouldn't matter where you are in the state. You should be confident that wherever you go in Michigan, that you can expect law enforcement officers in the area to be held to the same similar standards. And there is strong public support for the topics in this bill package. So a couple years ago, the stakeholder work group that we've been working with, including a couple folks on this call, we partnered with YouGov to do some polling, and they found that 64% of Michiganders support the no-knock proposal, which limits very much the use of no-knocks. 90% of Michiganders support the duty to intervene policy to be required across the state. 74% support strong use of force proposal. 78% support body cam tampering proposal, which prohibits body cam tampering. 88% support increased training around implicit bias and de-escalation and behavioral health. 89% support our separation records proposal. And so this is not actually controversial, the things that we are talking about in terms of the work that we have put forward after lots of work, lots of input, lots of changes over many years. And so I'll talk a little bit about my bill first, and then I'll talk about the rest of the bill package. One of the clearest and most direct ways that we can address the excessive use of force by some officers is to make sure that every single agency in Michigan adopts a use of force policy that is strong and that includes specific elements that have been associated with less police violence. We know, of course, that law enforcement officers are in a position of authority that other professions simply are not. They have authority over others. They are armed, and they have a unique training and ability to use force against other individuals in ways that civilians don't. And so that's why it's really important that there are clear and consistent standards for use of force. So my bill, Senate Bill 333, requires each agency to adopt a use of force policy, and that it must include a requirement that law enforcement officers may only use physical force that is objectively reasonable as defined in case law, and that the policy must include standards, procedures, and considerations around using physical force, issuing a verbal warning prior to using force, using deadly force on an individual only when necessary to protect that officer from an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm, and using other alternatives and de-escalation techniques. And the policy also must include that a chokehold constitutes deadly force. And so we also require in this bill that each law enforcement agency would review their policy and update it when necessary and make its policy publicly available by posting it on their website. And I want to recognize that many agencies do have use of force policies, but not every single one in Michigan does. And there are differences. And so that's why it's really important that there's the inclusion of all these specific elements in the policy while still allowing locals to go further if they wish. And so why is this so important? Why do we need these elements within use of force policies? Well, we know from research, including a 2016 report, that strong use of force policies are actually associated with fewer police killings per capita. So, for example, requiring an officer to exhaust all other means before shooting was associated with 25% fewer police killings. Requiring a verbal warning before shooting was associated with 5% fewer police killings. And then we also know that national groups have pointed out that officers and agencies with more restrictive use of force policies are actually less likely to be killed in the line of duty, less likely to be assaulted, and have a similar likelihood of sustaining an injury during an assault. So these policies are actually really important, not only for the community members' safety, but also for the officer's safety, which makes sense. It's logical, right? When you have clear policies around use of force, everyone is safer. The other bills, as mentioned earlier, Senator Erica Geis has reintroduced her bill to limit the use of no-knock warrants, making sure that the officer must be clearly identifiable as an officer or in uniform. Certain parameters around allowing time before entering, being clear about in the warrant about who is likely to be in the home, and a number of other parameters. And really, the goal is to limit the use of no-knock warrants, period. Senator Ruth Johnson, one of our Republican colleagues, has reintroduced her bill around requiring every agency to have a duty to intervene policy, which is very much related to what we saw happen in the case of George Floyd, knowing that unfortunately, right, there were several officers who witnessed the murder of George Floyd and did nothing to step in. And so requiring officers to, when feasible, when safe to do so, to intervene, and also, this is important, to report that incident to their immediate supervisor. It's something that we know that many agencies are already doing, but not every single agency is. And so it's very important that that is standard across the state. We also have a couple of bills from Senator Santana, which is really cracking down on this issue that is, it's unfortunate that this is even happening, but the tampering with body cameras or intentionally deactivating a camera while using excessive force. We know that this has happened, and it's clearly problematic because we need to be able to have that footage to know what exactly happened. There is a bill reintroduced by Senator Jeff Irwin, which is related to requiring officers to receive training in de-escalation, implicit bias, procedural justice, and crisis response. This is important for all of the logical reasons. If an officer is not receiving this training, how are we to expect them to be able to handle situations in the way that we want them to, and that we deserve in the type of interactions that we have with them? Senator Sarah Anthony has reintroduced legislation related to the MCOLS Act, the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, because it's so important that we are putting in greater consistency around the types of background checks that are being done before an officer is licensed, and also filling in some gaps related to the revocation of licenses if the officer has had problems in their past. And then Senators Jeremy Moss and Roger Victory. Roger Victory is one of the Republicans who has now been added to the bill package and is a great partner. These bills address the issue of bad cops agency hopping. We know that many police chiefs and sheriffs do not want to hire bad cops, but sometimes there is a gap where an officer leaves one agency in the middle of investigation, applies to another agency, and so the agency they're applying to may not actually have all the information that they would like to have about why that officer is even leaving the previous agency in the first place. Is there an investigation? Was there a use of excessive force? Was there some type of situation that was happening that the second agency may want to know about? Well, these bills make sure that there is a separation of service record or a provisional separation of service record if they haven't already left the agency, and also builds in due process for the officer related to the content of those records. Senator Ed McBroom, our Republican colleague up north in the Upper Peninsula, makes sure that the compulsory statements by officers are protected only if they are truthful statements. And so this is really critical for all the obvious reasons, and we're hopeful and grateful for Senator McBroom's involvement. I think I'm frozen.
We can hear you.
We
Okay.
can hear you.
I think I can't see you, but if you can still hear me.
We can still hear you and see you.
Yes, we can still see and hear you.
Okay, great. I can't see anyone now or my screen, so I'll just keep talking. The last thing I wanted to mention is that Senator Mary Kavanaugh has reintroduced legislation related to allowing individuals to submit an anonymous complaint, because sometimes someone might just want to file a complaint and they don't necessarily want a full investigation, but they want something on the record about an officer mistreating them in some way. Of course, if this gets to a point where, and I can see it all now, if it gets to the point where there's an actual investigation, goes to criminal proceedings, then obviously no longer anonymous. But we want to allow for those anonymous complaints if someone simply just wants to put something on the record. The last thing I will mention is, I think sometimes we need to think about, obviously we know the impact that police brutality has on the individual. We know the impact that it has on that person's family. We've seen, the pain that family members have endured in grappling with the death of a loved one. But it's important to recognize that police brutality also has impact on the mental health of Black Americans across this country. And there's been research done on this, right? This is not just a concept that is unproven, but it has been studied. And so we know, and many of you here on this Zoom know firsthand that it's the collective trauma that people experience when we see Black and Brown community members killed by the police, has a psychological impact. It is real, and we know that the types of heightened vigilance and fearful, emotions that people may have in interacting with law enforcement, those are very real. And we think about, as parents, conversations that we either have, or for me, in the future we'll have to have around what to do or how to be careful around law enforcement officers, simply because of the realities that we live in, as well as what our children, or for some of you, maybe your grandchildren, look like. And so that is very real. And so I just want to acknowledge that, especially because, again, we're on the heels of this decision to not retry Officer Scher in Grand Rapids. And, here we are 5 years later after the murder of George Floyd. There's a lot of thinking to do, but also a lot of emotional processing, right, that many of us and many of you have had to, go through as we grapple with what is the future that we want for our kids. So thank you for your work. I know many of you on this Zoom have been committed advocates for so long on issues of criminal justice, and I'm very grateful for your work.
Appreciate that, Senator Chang. Before we even can you guys hear me? Everybody hear me? Before we even get to our panelists, that was a lot that you unpacked, and I want to give the people in the audience the opportunity to do a little Q&A. There may have been a few things that people didn't catch or needed some clarification on. So the floor is open. I'm checking the chat, and I'm looking through to see if there are any hands open. If I don't see you, feel free to come off mic or come on mic. Pause. In the chat.
Alexandria has a hand up.
Alexandria, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much for taking time with us today, Senator Chang. In regards to the bills you spoke about, do any of them state that, well, maybe this is a separate from the bills. In terms of funding for law enforcement, are there any bills that state that funding in some ways is contingent upon meeting these accountability requirements?
So that would be something that we could do through the appropriations process. But one of the things that we know is that the appropriations process is only, an appropriations process is only good for that next fiscal year. And so I think it's actually really important that we put these policies in place and put these requirements into law, so that they are there, hopefully for a long, long time, unless a future legislature decides to undo them. But undoing a statute is a lot harder than, you know, undoing an appropriation, if that makes any sense. So I definitely hear you on the suggestion. But I think that at least from the standpoint of the folks that we've been working with for several years, really the focus has been on actually trying to put these requirements into law. Um, so hopefully that helps. But I will say, since you brought up this concept, on a sort of kind of related note, not exactly the same, but I love this. So Senator John Cherry, who is our colleague who chairs the General Government Subcommittee on the Appropriations Committee, which basically it covers several different budgets, but one of the budgets is for local governments. And so one of the pieces that he has included is that for I don't know that this is going to make its way all the way through to the end, but I love that he included it, is that in order for a city to receive revenue sharing dollars, that they must um, basically comply with the Fifth Amendment. And so looking at due process and things like that, that are guaranteed in our Constitution, and knowing some of the things that are happening in our communities, not necessarily, but kind of related to police, not exactly police brutality, but related to interactions of some law enforcement, especially with immigrant community members. That is one thing that he has done creatively to actually put in sort of like a policy issue into the budget process. But again, I'm not sure that it's going to make its way through this bipartisan budget. But it is an example of a way to, at least temporarily for 1 year, try to attempt to insert that kind of an issue.
Thank you.
Gotcha. Senator Chang, I got a question from Liz Balk of the ACLU of Michigan. What has been law enforcement's reaction to these bills?
Yeah. Oh, thanks for the question, Liz. And Liz, as well as Chuck and Michael and others on here, have been a part of these work group meetings for, I mean, a really long time. So thank you. So actually, what's been really interesting is that, when we started this process, we definitely had pushback, right, from many of the statewide law enforcement groups. But over time, as things have evolved and we've continued to take in feedback and take in input and work on changes to the bills, we are over the process of 5 years, basically, we now actually have the support of, or at least neutrality of many of the law enforcement agencies and organizations, not on every single bill, but many of them. So, as an example, the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police, as well as the Michigan Sheriff's Association, actually supports 7 out of the 11 bills. The Police Officers Association of Michigan, POAM, actually supports a little bit less than half of the bills, or is fine with at least less than half of the bills. And so, and I think that, in conversations with many of these guys, that it has been actually very clear that there is a recognition that there are problems, which is very different from the beginning conversations that we've had with many of these folks, right? Where sometimes it was this is not a problem in Michigan. This is not happening here. I think there is a recognition that yes, there are problems. And for chiefs and sheriffs, they don't want to hire bad cops. And so, especially looking at the separation records bills, and some of these bills where they know it'll actually help to improve the profession, they're supportive. And so we've also been grateful for the opportunity to work with Chief Bettison in Detroit, Chief Winstrom in Grand Rapids. Thanks, Liz, for helping connect us, to actually work with them on great op-eds in support of some of these policies. And so I think it's really important to note that when we're talking about these bipartisan bills, they are good for both community and for law enforcement. And so that is something that we are continuing to try to stress. We know that, of course, there are many folks who are critical of law enforcement. But at the same time, in the reality that we are in, being able to make the case and with evidence that there is evidence that shows that these changes will actually benefit everyone will only help us to be able to get this done in a bipartisan fashion through the legislature.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Katie Pels Davis asks, "What is the likelihood of these bills making it through this year?"
Yeah, well, we are in a legislature that is operating quite differently than any other legislature that I've served in so far. So, it's the first time, at least since I've been in office, that we've had a split legislature with the House controlled by one party and the Senate controlled by another. I've only served in an entire minority or an entire majority. And so that presents challenge, but also opportunity. So I think that we will, things have not been going, not even just on this issue, but just generally, things haven't necessarily been going the way they normally go in terms of the rate of passing bills through the legislature, even, ones that are very, very non-controversial. So, I don't really know what the likelihood is, but I think that this is an issue where we're going to have to continue to talk about the bipartisan support, right? We've got 3 Republicans who are sponsors of bills on this package. We've got support from law enforcement leaders around the state, and as well as, of course, many, many community organizations. And so we've just got to continue to talk about them, to talk to conservative lawmakers, remind them why this is an issue that conservatives should care about as well, and why some of them do care about this issue and why there's so much public support for them. And so I think it's a possibility as far as, on a scale of 0 to 10, I'm not exactly sure because nothing is really certain in terms of what we will be able to accomplish. But we've got to try, and I'm of course committed to continuing to work as hard as I can to get it done.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think there are any other questions for you right now, so I appreciate your time. I know you said you had to leave a little early, so whenever that is fine. But I also, at this time, would like to direct the conversation to our panel. So I have 2 panelists that are here in support of this conversation on police accountability and who have direct direct experience, direct community experience. So this first question I had, it actually came up while listening to Senator Chang, and that is in line with what we're discussing today. Talking about 5 years since the death of George Floyd and what has been done, what we've seen since. I want to introduce Michael Lynn. He is the Chief Executive Officer, right? The founder of the Lansing Empowerment Network. It is a collaborative of community members, shareholders in the Lansing area. I'll allow you to kind of describe that a little bit better. But before you do, as you do, I want to pose the question to you. In the Lansing area, which me being from the Lansing area, Senator Chang working here in the Lansing area on this legislation, it's going to affect us directly, right? But Lansing is often not one of the cities that's recognized where the problem is happening at because, there are denser populations that are, these things are happening a lot more rapidly, right? Detroit, Flint, Saginaw. But recently, I think, to my surprise at least, I found out that Lansing is in the top 4 or 5 of those cities that are dealing with a lot of these issues. So My question to you, as uh, after you introduce yourself a little bit further, Michael, can you talk a little bit about your experiences in these last 5 years and what you've seen here in this Lansing area?
Excuse me. Thanks, Mike. First of all, so I'm the CEO of the Lansing Empowerment Network. That is my new title. I'm also the co-founder of the Village Lansing. I am an ex-co-chair of the Black Lives Matter movement here in Lansing, as well as a community chair, ex-community chair with NAACP. And just really originally got started in this community work back when I was about 18 years old when the Lansing Police Department killed one of my best friends, AJ McKinstry. And there was a bunch of misinformation and so on that ensued about that. So that kind of what jumped me off the couch at that point in time, and then got more engaged as the last 10 years or so went on. But I think to your point, Mike, it's really interesting how when George Floyd was murdered, the sense was that we don't have these problems in Lansing from the community, right? Everybody's like, we don't got that problem here in Lansing. And I had been fighting that problem for multiple years at that point. So it was disturbing to hear what the community knows about what's really going on out here. This is how we get bad elections that happen. This is how we continue to have this problem. It's because a lot of times people are, living in blissful ignorance. To your point about Lansing being one of those cities, like, statistically, we're probably one of the worst. And it just gets hidden ultimately. I mean, we've had, I believe, about seven officer involved shootings over the last 5 years. I believe about five ended in death. We had a man killed with his hands cuffed behind his back inside our city jail. The second time that happened in the same spot. And then we're lied to for 10 months about that incident. Our police and community relations are really in a bad space. There was tables that came together around those incidents. Sarah Anthony being one that had brought a table together and kind of came up with some initiatives and focus. And then everybody kind of went back to their lives, right? And so like reversity instead of the diversity conversation, been where everybody started pulling back all of the diversity conversation and DEI conversation, and that's where we are today. So if I was to say where we are today compared to 5 years ago, I'd say we're in a worse position. And the reason I say that is because people have, the police departments have gotten away with much more. It's gotten so much worse from what they've gotten away with. And once you get away with something, it's like letting a kid cuss in your presence. They're just going to continue that process till it gets really bad. And so ultimately, these bills that um, uh, Stephanie Chang brought forward um, should be no brainers, in my opinion, but they're not. They're not going to be no brainers, but they should be no brainers. Holding accountability for those who have the ability to, on the regular duties of their job, kill somebody, and we don't have any accountabilities for these types of things. Is in my mind prehistoric, right? And so. I'm really excited to hear them going through. I'm not really, and I shouldn't say hear them going through, but hearing them taking the process, I'm not really confident that they will get anywhere with it. The question of how the police are going to respond to it, the same way they respond to a lot. But I've got a lot to talk about when it comes to this in the city of Lansing and what we've been working on, but I don't know where I should be as far as time. So I would like to get to what we're kind of working on in this progress on the boots on the ground level for setting up these accountability points with the police department.
Well, actually, you're kind of in the right pocket, right? Because we do also have Robin Etchison as one of the panelists. He is the He's the commissioner of the East Lansing Police Accountability Board out there. But he's also having some technical difficulties, so I'm behind the scenes working with him, trying to get him up to speed on the technical difficulties. And I have a second question that would have been posed to him in the interim, though I would like to pose it to you. And it's not even a question, it's a prompt. And that is for you to talk a little bit about the value of community involvement in police accountability. And you can also take a minute or so and discuss where you are with the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so community is that's the work that I'm doing is building the community's understanding about what's going on. Like ultimately, we get fed a lot of propaganda, so we don't really know how to feel about things. When things happen, there's always a push from the police department to justify, and then there's this subsection of community who are like, nah, the police are great. There's nothing wrong here. Like it must be justified that they did it. And so there's this Stockholm syndrome that we have as a community. And really what we have to do is break that down and start to educate folks on what's really happening in our communities. When we found out that Anthony Hulan was murdered inside our jail, the second person to be murdered in that same exact cell in the same fashion, and the video was out where this man was screaming for his life, talking about he couldn't breathe while having a knee on his neck, literally the same way George Floyd was murdered. He was murdered prior to George Floyd. When we all found that out, there were some people that just couldn't believe their eyes or what they were seeing. Of course, it couldn't be. It must be justified. It must this. It must be that. So there's a lot of education that had to happen for that purpose. Um, so what we do is that we educate folks on what we should be seeing, where the accountability points are that we should be holding, educating folks on what a complaint process looks like. A lot of people believe when they make a complaint, and it could be a justifiable complaint, that all of a sudden somebody's going to get fired, they're going to lose their pension, and that's just not usually what transpires. There's so much more that goes on, arbitration, so on and so forth. So managing our expectations as a community is also a big deal. And so we have been breaking down the complaint process to find out where we should be, where the community should be inlet. In other words, there's so many points of contact for the police department in this process, and ultimately they end up having the final say, which is what you're talking about with Robin Etchison. They have an oversight committee. In Lansing, we don't have that. We've been trying to get something like that for years now, and we really have started that push now. And actually, we're gonna so I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag, but we're kind of taking that process now and having conversation with our council members about doing something similar to what East Lansing has done. It hasn't come under all that much favor out there, as you can believe. I mean, they're out there holding accountability and on a point where, again, an accountability point where the police have to come back to even after they've had a terrible incident. They have to come there. And so for Mike, you've been in my 360 meetings, and actually the 360 meetings going on right now. It's
Right
another
now.
accountability point. It's a meeting. Yeah. It's a meeting that every Wednesday from 12 to 1, it's a gun violence prevention conversation, but ultimately it's also a conversation where the police have to be at every Wednesday to come and address the community. And whatever our needs are, whatever our concerns are. And if we as community can't hold space for accountability like that, we just don't have any power whatsoever. And that's ultimately where Lansing, and I'm sure across the country, that was always the motive is like everything was a webinar. The police would stand there and talk with 50 mics in their face. And then as soon as they wanted to cut a meeting, they would. Community never got a chance to really confront them on anything. So there was always this like king and popper type of relationship. And ultimately they worked for us. So we have to start engaging community and educating them on what they should be expecting from police departments and their municipality, because it's not just the police, it's the municipality that is allowing the police department to ravage neighborhoods and beat people and all of these other things with no accountability. In most cases, the municipality is the first check and balance that allows it to go on and on and on. And so that's what we really do is we try to break down those barriers of education, because once a community understands, and we've all seen that once we all stand up, the game is over. But you know how far we are away from that, Mike? You know what I mean? That's the problem, is that everybody doesn't necessarily know what we all know here. And if we can spread that information out and get people to care about it, come out of their blissful ignorance. And a lot of times, the only time people actually end up caring is when they have a complaint, when a police officer pulled them over for some odd reason and they had an issue. That's a lot of times the only time people want to come forward and make waves or get involved with anything. So activists or advocates like us are so easily picked off because we can't get a movement behind us going in the right direction. So I hope that answers the question, Mike. But we got a lot working. Again, we want to get the oversight committee the same as they do out there. But our complaint process, I believe, is a big piece because the city owns it. And ultimately, anytime somebody makes a complaint, the city's always looking at it from a liability standpoint, not a making sure this person is okay standpoint. And so they're always looking at it, but how much dollars is this going to cost me? Not, where's the situation with this person? And so that's why we have such bad police community relations, is because we just have no power in the situation.
I appreciate that, especially the breakdown of what Lansing Empowerment Network does, because I think that's valuable when it comes to community development and having some sort of a connection to, police accountability as an individual. Sometimes it feels like we don't have any connection to that thing or any right to it. especially I'm speaking for myself, being a black man and being formerly incarcerated, you almost feel like ain't no way I can speak to what the police do in the community. I almost deserve it out of being
You
so
know what,
used
Mike?
to it.
The crazy part about that is your voice is more needed than anybody's because you've been through all of it. And so that's why like I always try to uplift your voice anytime I can. Anybody who's been through the situations, those are the ones who everybody calls the loudest voices, but those are the voices that should be heard. Anytime you have a loud voice, bring them into the room. And so you're absolutely right, man. There's a lot of our community who do feel that way. There's a lot of our community who get pulled over and get their rights violated, but because they have a warrant for, driving with suspended, they don't want to make a complaint. And so our community has a lot of that problem. And this is again how things keep to festering because we don't have a whole lot of people coming forward with it.
I'm sorry, I muted my mic. Um, yes, sir. So I have another one for you. Um, is there or has there been any instances that you can speak to that you have seen positive impact or something good happened since then? I know from my own personal experience, I highlighted in different conversations that I've had. I've highlighted it in different conversations that I've had recently about how the movement has kind of upticked as far as criminal justice overall, right? A lot of the access to sitting at the tables, a lot of the access to even the information and resources didn't exist 5 years ago. And I came home from prison 5 years before that, and it was essentially nothing here for me. This landscape looked nothing like what it looks like now. So you want to talk a little bit about how that had any of the positives or any of that type of change you've seen?
I mean, we were ultimately forced to get community together. I think that that's what had to happen. Like during the Trump era, during George Floyd's murder, during all of the uprising and police reform conversation and really kind of running into brick walls, we were forced to get into basements and get into community centers and start to network with each other. And you're right, man. Like there was a point in time when none of this stuff existed. So that's obviously a bonus is that we have this room full of people. There's 42 people in here that are concerned with this problem. There wasn't that 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Like people were not as concerned about this issue. The idea of credible messenger wasn't a thing. So Mike, you would have never been sitting in the position you're in because they would have looked at your incarceration as a negative and not like your literal rocket ship to be certified to speak on these things. That's how I think the world has shifted a little bit is that more or less, like I was saying before, even in the gun violence realm, which is my expertise, those who have been impacted or those who have impacted others are really the voices that are being looked at now. We want to hear from you. And so the same similar issue or similar thing is happening in the incarceration mindset. And so, ultimately, I think that over the last 5, 10 years, we have just built community and we've stayed at this and stay consistent, which is one of the things that I always pride you and I pride with you is you are consistent, brother. You found your own lane. Even when people try to keep you out, you know what I mean? The spaces, look at, you found your space and found your lane, and there's community there to catch you and help you and spring you up. And so that's really what we do, the empowerment network, right? We empower folks. Who can I find who's willing to speak the voice, who has some knowledge and willing to understand things and learn things and get engaged, and then let's empower them and put them up. That's community focused. And so the community focus since I believe, since I was engaged 2018-ish, 2017 was when I really got engaged with the community stuff. It just wasn't what it is today. And the collaborations that are happening today, they just weren't there before. And with us in the Black community, there's a lot of times a lot of rifts that have happened over years and years of systemic, issues that in our communities, and we're even being able to get over those for the greater cause. So, um, that's one thing I do think is a positive. Again, this conversation coming back, Stephanie Chang talking on these bills that are going through. That's amazing. Like these things are things that we just didn't talk about 10 years ago. So a lot's happening that's good that way.
For sure, for sure. I appreciate you highlighting collaboration as well because uh, the fact that we are sitting in this space, like we have elected officials, we have, especially in spaces like Lansing Empowerment Network, where we have literally like from senators to police chief to grandma from down the street who doesn't like the loud noise that's happening in her community, right?
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
the the whole community is involved, and the whole community are stakeholders. So I appreciate that part about what you just said. Um, before I move forward, I do want to acknowledge that we had a little bit of technical issues. I was trying to do some side work, but I don't want to take away from what we have going on because I think this is a valuable conversation still. So my last prompt to you or question to you, Mike, is talk to us a little bit about what the future looks like. After listening to uh, Senator Chang talk about those bills being introduced and how they're working, and then, you know, connecting some of the dots to what you're doing right now, what you've seen, um, kind of reconcile the two for me. Show me, help us see what a future looks like or what a perfect future looks like from your perspective.
We got to get out and vote because if I'm correct, we don't own anything down there right now, so it's gonna be hard to get anything through, from what I understand. So we got to vote. We got to come together. Grassroots folks got to come together in those type of conversations and have real conversation about what they are. A lot of these bills people don't know are going through, so they're not calling their senators, they're not calling their House representatives, they're not telling them they want these things to go. You have, folks that'll be voting on these bills that don't believe they have this problem in their neighborhood or their neck of the wood. So like, there's always those concerns with these bills. So I'm gonna just be honest with you, and ultimately, my biggest focus always is gonna be community. I don't put a whole lot of bank in any of that stuff down there. I mean, I watch over it and I definitely pay attention and I vote, but I don't bank on those things working out for us because they just hardly ever do. And so ultimately, the biggest thing I can say is that if we have a grassroots movement, we can determine whatever happens down there, out here in the community, so on and so forth. So that's always going to be the thing that I nick away at is getting the community engaged in all of these different things. So, I mean, if those bills were to go through, obviously that would hold accountability. Obviously, I think there'd be some rebellion by the police departments across the country or across the state. These are things that, again, should be conversation. It shouldn't be a problem, but ultimately we know, even in my relationship with the police departments that I have now, we have, like you stated, both chief and assistant chief in the meetings every Wednesday, and I have a really good relationship with both of them. But when I sit down and talk with them and we break bread, I can tell they don't get it from my perspective at all. It doesn't matter how much I explain it. Our assistant chief lives in St. John's. He's born and raised there. He comes to the city really just to chief. And again, I think he's an amazing guy, but trying to get people to understand from the perspective that we come from and what's needed is really difficult. And so they have to have a hell of a lot of empathy to really be able to move things for you when they can't understand or see it. So that's always going to be my concern is they'll find loopholes, they'll find ways around it. Um, the ultimate, they still have to go in front of judges should they do break the law. They got to go in front of their chief or their police departments. So there's always those concerns, bro. Like there's no accountability we had unless the community holds the accountability. That's how I always feel about it. This is why we hold that 360 meeting. This is why we've allowed them into our space. We are creating platforms for you to figure out how you can regain our trust as a community. That's unheard of across the country, where the community sets the table and says, we're going to allow y'all to come in this space, but you're going to do it on our terms. You're going to answer the questions when you're asked. These are the things that we expect of you in this space. There's a covenant to all of this. And that's a totally different shift where we're not coming to a meeting where we don't really have any say so or power and we can't just dictate how this thing goes. And so I feel like to draw it all for you together, in my opinion, thank you for the Senator Chang and what she's doing and what's going on up there. But meanwhile, it's like I'm got to do two things. I'm gonna keep building out here, so that if that fails or whatever happens with that, it's not gonna deter what we're trying to do out here because laws change every day. I mean, there was a day when it was illegal to carry a firearm in Michigan, concealed unless you were a jeweler, or a police officer. Now today anybody can get one as long as they go through a course. So, and then now they're even trying to walk that back, or so there's so much that happens on the day to day, and we just have to be stable in our own spaces in our own community, in my opinion, to combat all of these things. And what I mean by that ultimately is that if we can show If we can show that we can move a municipality out because their police department is not serving us correctly, that police department will serve us correctly. But we can't show that
Hmm,
we can show up to the polls, and we can't show that we can register voters, and we can't show that we can do any of those things, a municipality will do whatever they want to do to disenfranchise people. And that's ultimately what we are in the city. And so across the country, we're disenfranchised. So I feel like we have to get our worth back and understand that part of it. And if we can understand voting and why it's so important, even one vote specifically, again, we have enough people in the city of Lansing to move a mountain if we wanted to, if we all ran to the polls with one mindset. And that's the grassroots
yes, sir.
mentality. So that's what I'm trying to kick forward to people. So I
Appreciate
can't
that.
get all
Appreciate
jumpy
that.
about those
I'm saying,
bills. I appreciate the bills, but yeah, no, I know I appreciate the bills, but again, don't that not stuff, not senator, but the Republicans don't attach that bill to something crazy. We got to give up something crazy to get the bill through, So there's all of those different things. So it's always concerning that way. So I just continue to build in the community, bro.
yeah. Well, you actually made the perfect segue for me because I was going to open. I'm opening up the floor for questions from the audience. But the first question that I saw was from Chuck, and he was asking, with Lansing being diversified the way that it is, as far as the metro area being, what it is, how do you manage the community connections when each municipality has its own PD? The Lansing, East Lansing, Ingham County, Holt, Okemos, and even some townships.
Yeah, so my to answer that question, my community engagement is Lansing specific. Now, I have showed up out in East Lansing before because I tell people all the time, wherever there's police brutality and racism, you're gonna see Mike Lynn. I'm gonna be out there to hold some accountability and point some fingers and have some conversation. But ultimately, so I have gone out to East Lansing at times when they was having issues, but ultimately I choose to start right here in my nucleus in my city, but also because I recognize like Holt, East Lansing, I go to where the acute problem is. Okemos doesn't have the problem we have. East Lansing doesn't have the problem that we have necessarily. So if we fix the problem where it's most marginalized folks are at and where most things are impacting us, it'll spread out to everybody else. And that's not a trickle down conversation. That's the reality. If we fix our problem here in the city, which is the nucleus of all these areas, I mean, anywhere you go 5 miles outside of Lansing is rural and corn husks and stuff. So, like, if we fix this situation in our community and get them on board with doing things right, then a lot of times that trickles out. And so, I think another part of the community connection engagement aspect is that a lot of people own Lansing, feel like they have ownership in Lansing and stake in Lansing too. A lot of our ally groups, when I was with Black Lives Matter, a lot of our ally groups were from East Lansing, Okemos, so on and so forth. Ally meaning, non-people of color who would come together and support movements that we was on. All of those people, for the most part, lived on the outskirts. So they do take ownership in Lansing as well. Given our population is about 22% African American, it's the biggest population of African Americans in this region. And so when it comes down to issues that directly affect us, we had a lot of community engagement there. With the municipalities, we put the offer out and ask out. Folks show up or they don't. Right now, currently, we have Lansing Police Department, we have Ingham County Sheriff's Department, and we have Eaton County Sheriff's Department in this meeting that I'm kind of into. We still have not gotten East Lansing in there, MSU, any of the other surroundings. So that's always a concern. The ask has been put out, but they've got to come to the table willingly. It's not anything we're going to force them to. I hope that answered the question. And then township is one of those police departments that shouldn't even exist, to be honest with you. Uh,
Hmm,
they're just in the way in most cases.
hmm. Got you. Appreciate that. The floor is open as well right now. If anybody has any questions for Mike, I know you were on a time crunch as well. So I'm in the chat as well as
I'm good, brother. I'm here.
this.
My meeting's over.
Okay, okay, cool, cool, cool. So any questions for Mike, especially you mentioned that this approach, the collaborative approach locally, is kind of unheard of around the country. This is not necessarily a thing that's happening in, say, a Detroit or a Flint. So I definitely welcome questions as to how you know this thing was put together or anything like that, or put it in the chat and I will pull it up and bring it up.
Hey, Michael, it's Kristen Bergard. Sorry, I couldn't find my button to put my hand up. Is it okay if I ask a question?
It is.
Okay, thank
Please.
you. Michael, my name's Kristen Bergard. I work for the University of Michigan in the School of Public Policy. And I was curious, you said something that I found really interesting, which is that people who were formerly incarcerated may not feel like their voice will be heard, but it sounded like, from your point of view, those are the voices that must be heard. And there's a lot of credibility when people who are formerly incarcerated speak. And I was just curious, like, is your organization doing anything to let people who were formerly incarcerated know that what they're saying is a lot of value, has a lot of value, and also encouraging them to do that? Thank you.
Yeah, so me specifically in my organization, that's all we deal with is folks that are formerly incarcerated. I mean, that's our credible messengers, folks that are formerly incarcerated or folks who have backgrounds and histories. I would never send anybody to have a conversation with a youngster about engaging in gun violence or any of those things that they can't relate to this young man's plight. And not to say there's not a space for that from the position that I'm coming from. There's different positions that folks come from. There's the position where the young man or young lady has already moved out of the street. They're not engaged in that anymore. Now they just need some real mentorship from the pastor or whoever it is. But when we're really engaging people like right now, those are the folks that need to be having their conversation heard. But ultimately, I mean, when we put the Village Lansing together, that's exactly what I did. I went and found, cousins of mine who had been incarcerated, folks who and when I came to, I remember we went to City Hall and they were having like a gun violence conversation. And I got on the microphone. I said, if you want to fix this problem and you really want to get to the bottom of it, you're gonna have to bring people in here who are from this position, that are from this area. It's gonna smell like some weed. It's gonna be some cussing going on. You might not like what they say on their Facebook, but they're gonna have the answer to the problems you have. And those folks are hardly ever brought into the room for conversation. And I don't think that it's because people don't believe they have it. I think people don't feel comfortable around people like that. And so that's the point. Like that's really what it is comfort levels. Who do I feel comfortable with? And no matter what we're talking about. And so whoever they feel comfortable with is who they put on boards and commissions. That's who they put on the task force, so on and so forth. And I could go on and on. I'm really engaged in a lot of this stuff. And I don't want to this is probably not the platform for a lot of it, but this is why I don't trust a whole lot. Boards, commissions, task force, so on and so forth. Because those folks that are on there are not rebel rousers. Those are not people who are going to make any movement. Those are people who are, especially when they're put on there by the establishment. How could they be somebody that's going to bring up new ideas when the establishment is the one that brought them there? They can make the ideas, they come up with it if they wanted to. So that's my focus always is going to be bringing those who are impacted to the forefront and letting their voice be heard.
Thank you.
We got a question. We also got a question in the chat from Bianca Jones. I know the answer to it, but I'm gonna give you the opportunity to speak to it. And that is, are you working with Advanced Peace? She says, I
Yeah,
believe
we
they have been
actually,
working in Lansing the last couple of years.
yeah, the Village Lansing actually advanced piece here to Lansing really was instrumental in getting that stood up here. And we continue to work alongside advanced peace in a supportive role. The Village Lansing originally started doing intervention back in about 2019, 2020. As we brought advanced peace here, it got put in place, resourced, and it's where it's at now. The village pulled out of the intervention space because we have somebody doing that now and kind of figured out where else we could be helpful. And that's the prevention support stage. So we still work alongside them however we can to support them. We share all of our resources with them, and they do the same for us.
For sure. For sure. Let me check. Is there any other questions that are hands up that I might have missed? I see none. I see none. Well, since there are no further questions, I definitely appreciate you. Oh, Chuck has a hand up.
Thank you, Michael. So,
Yes,
Mike, you
sir.
mentioned that you're trying to set up an oversight commission like they have in East Lansing there in Lansing. And I also heard you say that you have a distrust of the board and commission structure. So I'm curious how you're looking at setting up what you want to build in Lansing to avoid that. Oh, we're going to pick the safe folk and make sure that this board doesn't actually get attended to the problem issue.
Yeah, so I was alongside when East Lansing kind of built theirs. Chuck Grisby was holding like these informational meetings, and they had all of these meetings going on in conversation. And Chuck was he was a just a regular citizen at the time. I'm not sure if he's on the human services board or what he was on, but I watched that thing kind of get built from the ground up. One thing I like about East Lansing is that they have people from outside the city that's on that board and that commission. So there's not just folks that I think there's two spaces on there for anybody in the community that can be from Lansing, wherever you are. So ultimately, I mean, it's going to take. This is the biggest piece for me. City council, in my opinion, are closer to the people than a mayor or an executive branch would be. If city council are the ones um, who are the ones who are fielding applications and are appointing folks to that commission, we have a heck of a better chance than if it's the mayor, right? Our boards and commissions in Lansing are all appointed by the mayor. So the mayor gets all of the interview sheets and he gets all of the people who applied, and then he decides who he sends forward to council for them to appoint. And basically, they get one person and then they put them forward. And when you look at the makeup, especially if you have any type of understanding of the politics in Lansing, you see all the friends and the paybacks and all of those different things, the kind of blocking tacklers. So that's always the concern when it comes to boards and commissions, and it would still be a concern with this commission. I would have to be over top. I would have to be on top of this thing and watching every piece of it, and obviously, getting with our council members to make sure things are going to be ran correctly. But that's it. Anytime you're dealing with anything inside the government, it could be, in my opinion, it can be co-opted. And that's why I don't build inside the government. I build outside the government. People always ask me, Mike, you gonna run for council? Mike, you gonna run? No, because I do better out here when I don't have to deal with that type of that type of entities and the things that go on inside politics. So I'm always building out in the community. So if that gets built inside there, the community will just have to be overseeing that piece. And if the community's in that piece, such as they are in East Lansing, I think we'll be all right. I see that you
Go
said in
ahead,
Ann Arbor the
Kristen.
process shifted. Yeah, that's good.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay, thank you. So, Michael, you had mentioned that with like being on commissions and other decision-making bodies, that people on those commissions are, what was the word that you used? Maybe it was like uncomfortable with people who were formerly incarcerated being on the commission as well. And I'm curious, what what are they uncomfortable about?
You know, I always tell people like people will say to me like they always warn me about Mike and Erica and like don't work with them. And I'm just telling y'all the honest to God truth. This is what happens. This is my transparency. And I always tell those people, if you ain't out here corrupt and you got community mind and focus, you ain't got nothing to worry about from Mike and Erica. But if you playing any type of games, if you got anything under your skirt or anything under your arm and you trying to hide, you don't want to be in a relationship with us. Because if I feel like you came into a false relationship and didn't come in good faith and I find it out, I'm outing you. If you come in here, so like this is, I think, a lot of the reason why they're terrified of people who are willing to speak their voice, people that are shown to be activists in that sense. You're not going to play me. You're not going to play with me. You're not going to play with my people. So we're going to be straightforward and we're going to be coming in good faith in this space. And if you're not in coming in good faith, then we're going to get to the bottom of some things. And I think a lot of people don't like a lot of people in those positions. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for an elected mayor to bring somebody like me in the room when I could call it out and I'm going to be inconsolable. No, you're just not doing that to my people, and I'm inconsolable about it. Like that's dangerous to have me in that space because it can hurt his future elections and so on and so forth. So they don't want people like us in there in these boards of commissions that are going to actually say, you know what we found the problem is? You. You know where we found the issue? In your office. And that's why they don't want folks like us in the spaces. And that's why it's uncomfortable because comfortability comes from folks that are to move their morals compass aside to stay in the room. And me, I don't last on things like that for very long because, it's like if I'm gonna be a DEI expert, you got to give me all my money up front. Because I'm positive I'm gonna find out it's you that's the problem in this organization, and then you ain't gonna want to pay me. So this is the mindset we have to have when you're talking about these entities that have been able to move like this for years and years and years. They don't want somebody like me in the room.
Thank you. That's
I
super
hope that
helpful.
answered the question.
It did. Thank you.
Just checking the room before we get to the next steps to make sure I don't forget anybody or overlook anybody's question. Yes, ma'am, Alexandria.
Yes. So I'm of the belief that when it comes to mental health, um, and unhoused people, that requires a different response outside of law enforcement. Uh, in Lansing, are you seeing the response to those with behavioral health needs as the police responding, or is it a separate effort to address those with behavioral health needs and unhoused people?
Are you asking me? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So in Lansing, they have social workers that walk around with, go alongside with the police. They do have social workers. From the municipality standpoint, that's what they deal with. They have the social workers that they have. They have a housing ombudsman. They have HRCS, the Human Relations and Community Services, who kind of tries to find folks housing and so on and so forth. But they're way like we have a really big problem in Lansing because we are the central nucleus to all these other cities, and we're pretty much the only one that has resources. So anybody that's homeless in Holt is really homeless in Lansing, or anybody that's homeless in any place else is homeless in Lansing. And so the mental health care. I was a firefighter also. I should have probably said that. I was an EMT firefighter. So a lot of times when there's a mental health issue will get called along with the police to make sure everything, the person is okay health wise, and then we'll take them to CMH or whatever the case is. But it doesn't always go that way. And we had a young man back during George Floyd, when George Floyd got murdered, about after that, was having a mental health breakdown, came outside with a shotgun. The police killed him dead right there in front of his grandmother. And so, it's not a perfected art at all. And, even with the caseworkers or the social workers, I think there's maybe three or four of them. And they look like police. They go out in the same uniform, bulletproof vest, everything. They still have a gun on them. And so, that's just not going to be conducive to what we're trying to see. And so, uh, for me, it's just really, again, a community standpoint. Because in the community, we have a whole lot going. We got the cardboard prophets. We've got Punks with Lunch. We got the Homeless Angels. We got Mike Carl, who goes out into the community where these people are at and finds them and gets them sheltering. He's consistently advocating and advocating for them to get housing throughout the city, making sure all their paperwork and documentation is right. So I think we have a lot more when it comes to that um, in the community that was new to the city. Like these caseworkers are like over the last 2 years.
Chuck, just as other communities use separate response rather than a co-response model to avoid the social workers looking like being too associated with the police. And yeah, I
Yeah.
did
So the
expect you
problem
to
with
say
that
that in your
is like,
introduction, Mike. I did expect you to say you were a firefighter.
yeah, no, yeah. So I was a firefighter until the third old police chief got me fired from my job. So this there's a lot that's gone on and transpired through this advocacy that I've taken in our city against the policing that's happened. But the
Yes, sir.
conversation about that in Lansing, Lansing is this weird neoliberal city that believes that it's way above the curve and liberal is all get out, but really does really like right-leaning things, right? So anything that has to do with money goes through the police department. So if caseworkers are going to have money come in the city, they're not going to put that in our HRCS department where they could be a separate entity going out to these spaces. It's going to go under the police budget. And this is kind of how everything works in the city of Lansing. And so that's why I call it a neoliberal environment because they're really, yeah, they're not, like kind of, I don't know. So again, there's a lot of that.
Got you.
That transpires in the city, but that's why we don't have that. And when they talked about having the caseworkers and social workers, we asked and demanded they don't go inside the police department. But of course, at this point in time, when that happened, we didn't have a voice at that point. So we didn't have a say, and they just did it anyways.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Appreciate that, Mike.